Welcome to Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine's Fiction Podcast. I'm EQMM's editor, Janet Hutchings. John Dickson Carr, one of the greatest mystery writers of all time, was unsurpassed as the creator of Locked Room Mysteries. He's also a writer whose connection to EQMM goes back to the magazine's earliest days, not only as a contributor of fiction, but as one of EQMM's book reviewers for the long-running column, The Jury Box. Mystery writing seems to run in the blood of the Carr family. John Dickson Carr's daughter, Julia McNiven, debuted in EQMM's Department of First Stories in 1974, and his granddaughter, Shelly Dickson Carr, is the author of the novel Ripped, the winner of 3 Ben Franklin Awards and the Bill Fisher Award for Best First Young Adult Fiction. When we learned that Shelly would be attending the Malice Domestic convention in Bethesda this past spring, we thought it would be a great idea to ask her to read one of her grandfather's stories for EQMM for our podcast series. Here she is reading The Gentleman from Paris by John Dickson Carr. The story was one of the winners of the 13 worldwide short story contests that EQMM ran starting in the 1940s.
Carlton House Hotel, Broadway, New York, 14th April, 1849. My dear brother, were my hand more steady, Maurice, or my soul less agitated, I should have written to you before this. All is safe. So much I tell you at once. For the rest, I seek sleep in vain, and this is not merely because I find myself a stranger and a foreigner in New York. Listen and judge. We discussed, I think, the humiliation that a Frenchman must go to England ere he could take passage in a reliable ship for America. The Britannia steamship departed from Liverpool on the 2nd of the month and arrived here on the 17th. Do not smile, I implore you, when I tell you that my first visit on American soil was to Platt's Saloon under Wallack's Theater. Great God, that voyage! On my stomach I could hold not even champagne. For one of my height and breadth, I was weak as a child. Be good enough, I said to the fur-capped coachman, when I had struggled through the horde of Irish immigrants, to drive me to some fashionable place of refreshment. The coachman had no difficulty in understanding my English, which pleased me. And how extraordinary were these saloons! The saloon of Monsieur Platt was loud with the thump of hammers cracking ice, which is delivered in large blocks. Though the hand-colored glass globes and rose paintings on the front of the bar counter were as fine as we could see in the 3 provincial brothers in Paris, yet I confess that the place did not smell so agreeably. A number of gentlemen, wearing hats perhaps a trifle taller than is fashionable at home, lounged at the bar counter and shouted. I attracted no attention until I called for a sherry cobbler. One of the bartenders, as they are called in New York, gave me a sharp glance as he prepared the glass. "Just arrived from the old country, I bet," said he in no unfriendly tone. Though it seems strange to hear France mentioned in this way, I smiled and bowed assent. "Italian, maybe?" said he. This bartender, of course, could not know how deadly was the insult. "Sir," I replied, "I am a Frenchman." And now, in truth, he was pleased. His fat face opened and smiled like a distorted gold-toothed flower. "Is that so now?" he exclaimed. "And what might your name be, unless—" And here his face darkened with that sudden defensiveness and suspicion which, for no reason I can discern, will often strike into American hearts. "Unless," said he, "you don't want to give it." "Not at all," I assured him earnestly. "I am Armand de Lafayette, at your service." My dear brother, what an extraordinary effect! It was silence. All sounds, even the faint whistling of the gas jets, seemed to die away in that stone-flagged room. Every man along the line of the bar was looking at me. I was conscious only of faces, mostly with whiskers under the chin instead of down the cheekbones, turned to me. "Well, well, well," almost sneered the bartender. "You wouldn't be no relation to the Marquis de Lafayette, would you?" It was my turn to be astonished. Though our father has always forbidden us to mention the name of our late uncle, due to his Republican sympathies, yet I knew he occupied small place in the history of France, and it puzzled me to comprehend how these people had heard of him. The late Marquis de Lafayette, I was obliged to admit, was my uncle. "You better be careful, young feller," suddenly yelled a grimy little man with a pistol buckled under his long coat. "We don't like being diddled, we don't." "Sir," I replied, taking my bundle of papers from my pocket and whacking them down on the bar counter, "have the goodness to examine my credentials. Should you still doubt my identity, we can then debate the matter in any way which pleases you." "This is furrin writin'," shouted the bartender. "I can't read it." And then, how sweet was the musical sound on my ear! I heard a voice addressing me in my own language. "Perhaps, sir," said the voice in excellent French and with great stateliness, "I may be able to render you some small service." The newcomer, a slight man of dark complexion, drawn up under an old shabby cloak of military cut, stood a little way behind me. If I had met him on the boulevards, I might not have found him very prepossessing. He had a wild and wandering eye, with an even wilder shimmer of brandy. He was not very steady on his feet, and yet, Maurice, his manner, it was such that I instinctively raised my hat, and the stranger very gravely did the same. "And to whom," said I, "have I the honor?" "I am Thaddeus Purley, sir, at your service." "Another foreigner," said the grimy little man in disgust. "I am indeed a foreigner," said Monsieur Purley in English. "A foreigner to this dram shop, a foreigner to this neighborhood, a foreigner to—" Here he paused, and his eyes acquired an almost frightening glaze of loathing. Yet I never heard that the speaking or reading of French was so very singular an accomplishment. Imperiously, and yet, it seemed to me, with a certain shrinking nervousness, Monsieur Purley came closer and lifted the bundle of papers. "Doubtless," he said loftily, "I should not be credited were I to translate these. But here," said he, scanning several of the papers, "is a letter of introduction in English. It is addressed to President Zachary Taylor from the American minister at Paris." Again, my brother, what an enormous silence! It was interrupted by a cry from the bartender, who had snatched the documents from Monsieur Purley. "Boys, this is no diddle," said he. "This gent is the real thing." "He ain't," thundered the little grimy man with incredulity. "He is," said the bartender. "I'll be a son of a row if he ain't." "Well, Maurice, you and I have seen how Paris mobs can change. Americans are even more emotional. In the wink of an eye, hostility became frantic affection. My back was slapped, my hand wrung, my person jammed against the bar by a crowd fighting to order me more refreshment. The name of Lafayette again and again rose like a holy diapason. In vain I asked why this should be so. They appeared to think I was joking, and roared with laughter. I thought of Monsieur Thaddeus Purley as one who could supply an explanation. But in the first rush towards me, Monsieur Purley had been flung backwards. He fell sprawling in some wet stains of tobacco juice on the floor, and now I could not see him at all. For myself, I was weak from lack of food. A full beaker of whiskey, which I was obliged to drink because all eyes were on me, made my head reel. Yet I felt compelled to raise my voice above the clamor. "Gentlemen," I implored them, "will you hear me?" "Silence for Lafayette," said the big but very old man, with faded red whiskers. He had tears in his eyes, and he had been humming a catch called Yankee Doodle. "Silence for Lafayette." "Believe me," said I am full of gratitude for your hospitality, but I have business in New York, business of immediate and desperate urgency. If you will allow me to pay my reckoning—" "Your money's no good here, monsieur," said the bartender. "You're going to get liquored up, good and proper." "But I have no wish, believe me, to become liquored up. It might well endanger my mission. In effect, I wish to go." "Wait a minute," said the little grimy man with a cunning look. "What is this here business?" "You, Maurice, have called me quixotic. I deny this. You have also called me imprudent. Perhaps you are right, but what choice was left to me? Has any gentleman here," I asked, "heard of Madame Thevenet? Madame Thevenet, who lives at number 23 Thomas Street, near Hudson Street?" I had not, of course, expected an affirmative reply, yet in addition to one or two snickers at mention of the street, several nodded their heads. "Old miser woman?" asked a sportive character who wore checkered trousers. "I regret, sir, that you correctly describe her. Madame Thevenet is very rich, and I have come here," cried I, "to put right a damnable injustice." Struggle as I might, I could not free myself. "How's that?" asked half a dozen. Madame Thevenet's daughter, Mademoiselle Claudine, lives in the worst of poverty at Paris. Madame herself has been brought here under some spell by a devil of a woman calling herself, gentlemen, I implore you. And I bet you, cried the little grimy man, you're sweet on this daughter, what's her name? He seemed delighted. Ain't you now? How, I ask, of all Providence, could these people have surprised my secret? Yet I felt obliged to tell the truth. I will not conceal from you, I said, that I have, in truth, a high regard for Mademoiselle Claudine. But this lady, believe me, is engaged to a friend of mine, an officer of artillery. Then what do you get out of it, eh? Asked the grimy little man, with another cunning look. The question puzzled me. I could not reply, but the bartender with the gold teeth leaned over to me. If you want to see the old Frenchie alive, monsieur, said he, you'd better git. I hearn tell she had a stroke this morning. But a dozen voices clamored to keep me there, though this last intelligence sent me into despair. Then up rose the big and very old man with the faded whiskers. Indeed, I had never realized how old, because he seemed so hale. Which of you was with Washington? Said he, suddenly taking hold of the fierce little man's neckcloth and speaking with contempt. Make way for the nephew of Lafayette. They cheered me then, Armand. They hurried me to the door. They begged me to return. They promised they would await me. One glance I sought, nor can I say why, for Monsieur Thaddeus Perley. He was sitting at a table by a pillar, under an open gas jet, his face whiter than ever. He was still wiping stains of tobacco juice from his cloak. Never have I seen a more mournful prospect than Thomas Street, when my cab set me down there. Perhaps it was my state of mind, for if Madame Thevenet had died without a sou left to her daughter, you conceive it? The houses of Thomas Street were faced with dingy yellow brick, and a muddy sky hung over the chimney-pots. It had been warm all day, yet I found my spirit intolerably oppressed. Though heaven knows our Parisian streets are dirty enough, we do not allow pigs in them. Except for these, nothing moved in the forsaken street save a blind street musician and his dog and an instrument called a banjo, but even he was silent too. For some minutes, it seemed to me, I plied the knocker at number 23 with hideous noise. Nothing stirred. Finally, one part of the door swung open a little, as for an eye, whereupon I heard the shifting of a floor bolt, and both doors were swung open. Need I say that facing me stood the woman we have agreed to call Mademoiselle Jezebel? She said to me, "Ah, then, Monsieur Armand!" "Madame Thevenet," cried I, "is she still alive?" "She is alive," replied my companion, looking up at me from under the lids of her greenish eyes, "but she is completely paralyzed." I have never denied, Maurice, that Mademoiselle Jezebel has a certain attractiveness. She is not old or even middle-aged. Were it not that her complexion is as muddy as the sky above us, then she would have been pretty. And as for Claudine, I said to her, the daughter of Madame, "You've come too late, Monsieur Armand." And well I remember that at this moment there rose up in the mournful street outside the tinkle of a banjo played by the street musician. It moved closer, playing a popular catch whose words ran something thus: "Oh, I come from Alabama with my banjo on my knee. I depart for Louisiana, my Susanna for to see." Across the lips of Mademoiselle flashed a smile of peculiar quality, like a razor cut before the blood comes. "Gold," she whispered. 90,000 persons, one hears, have gone to seek it. Go to California, Monsieur Armand. It is the only place you will find gold. This tune, they say, is a merry tune. It did not seem so, as a dreary twanging faded away. Mademoiselle Jezebel, with her muddy blonde hair parted in the middle and drawn over her ears after the best fashion, faced me implacably. Her greenish eyes were wide open. Her old brown taffeta dress, full at the bust, narrow at the waist, rustled its wide skirts as she glided a step forward. "Have a kindness," I said, "to stand aside. I wish to enter." Hitherto in my life I had seen her docile and meek. "You are no relative," she said. "I will not allow you to enter." "In that case I regret I must." "If you have ever spoken one kind word to me," whispered Mademoiselle, looking up from under her eyelids and with her breast heaving, one gesture of love, that is to say of affection, you might have shared 5,000,000 francs. Stand aside, I say. As it is, you prefer a doll-faced consumptive at Paris. So be it. I was raging, Maurice, I confess it, yet I drew myself up with coldness. You refer, perhaps, to Claudine Thevenet? And to whom else? I might remind you, mademoiselle, that the lady is pledged to my good friend, Lieutenant Delage. I have forgotten her. Have you? Asked our Jezebel, with her eyes on my face and a strange, hungry look in them. Well, she will die, unless you can solve a mystery. A mystery? I should not have said mystery, Monsieur Armand, because it is impossible of all solution. It is an act of God. Up to this time, the glass-fronted doors of the vestibule had stood open behind her against the darkness of closed shutters in the house. There breathed out of it an odor of unswept carpets, a sourness of stale living. Someone was approaching, carrying a lighted candle. "Who speaks?" called a man's voice, shaky, but as French as Mademoiselle Jezebel's. "Who speaks concerning an act of God?" I stepped across the threshold. Mademoiselle, who never left my side, immediately closed and locked the front doors. As the candle glimmer moved still closer in gloom, I could have shouted for joy to see the man who, as I guessed correctly, I had come to meet. "You are Monsieur Duroc, the lawyer," I said. "You are my brother's friend." Monsieur Duroc held the candle higher to inspect me. He was a big, heavy man who seemed to sag in all his flesh. In compensation for his bald head, the grayish-brown mustache flowed down and parted into two hairy fans of beard on either side of his chin. He looked at me through oval, gold-rimmed spectacles in a friendly way, but yet frightened. His voice was deep and gruff, clipping the syllables despite his fright. "And you," clip-clip, the candle-holder trembled, "you are Armand de Lafayette. I had expected you by the steam packet today. Well, you are here. On a fool's errand, I regret." "But why?" And I shouted at him, Maurice. I looked at Mademoiselle, who was faintly smiling. "Monsieur Duroc," I protested, "you wrote to my brother. You said you had persuaded Madame to repent for her harshness towards her daughter." "Was that your duty?" asked the Jezebel, looking full at Monsieur Duroc with her greenish eyes. "Was that your right?" "I am a man of law," said Monsieur Duroc. The deep monosyllables rapped in ghostly bursts through his parted beard. "I am correct, very correct, and yet—" "Who nursed her?" asked Jezebel. "Who soothed her? Who fed her? Wore her filthy clothes? Calmed her tempers? Endured her interminable abuse? I did!" And yet, all the time she was speaking, this woman kept sidling and sidling against me, brushing my side, as though she would make sure of my presence there. "Well," said the lawyer, "it matters little now. This mystery—" You may well believe that all these cryptic remarks, as well as reference to a mystery or an act of God, had driven me almost frantic. I demanded to know what he meant. "Last night," said Monsieur Duroc, "a certain article disappeared." "Well? Well?" "It disappeared," said Monsieur Duroc, drawn up like a grenadier, "but it could not conceivably have disappeared. I myself swear this. Our only suggestions to how it might have disappeared are a toy rabbit and a barometer." "Sir," I said, "I do not wish to be discourteous, but—" "Am I mad, you ask?" I bowed. If any man can manage at once to look sagging and uncertain, yet stately and dignified, Monsieur Duroc managed it then. And dignity won, I think. "Sir," he replied, gesturing with the candle toward the rear of the house, "Madame Thevenet lies in her bed. She is paralyzed. She can move only her eyes or partially the lips without speech. Do you wish to see her? If I am permitted." "Yes, that would be correct. Accompany me." And I saw the poor old woman, Maurice. Call her Harridan if you like. It was a square room of good size, whose shutters had remained closed and locked for years. Can one smell rust? In that room with faded green wallpaper, I felt I could. One solitary candle did little more than dispel shadow. It burned atop the mantelpiece, well opposite the foot of the bed, and a shaggy man, whom I afterwards learned to be a police officer, sat in a green upholstered armchair by an unlighted coal fire in the fireplace grate, picking his teeth with a knife. "If you please, Dr. Harding," Monsieur Duroc called softly in English. The long and lean American doctor, who had been bending over the bed so as to conceal from our sight the head and shoulder of Madame Thevenet, turned round, but this cadaverous body, in such fashion were Madame's head and shoulders propped up against pillows, this cadaverous body, I say, still concealed her face. "Has there been any change?" persisted Monsieur Duroc in English. "There has been no change," replied the dark-complexioned Dr. Harding, "except for the worse." "Do you want her to be moved?" "There has never been any necessity," said the physician, picking up his beaver hat from the bed. He spoke dryly. "However, if you want to learn anything more about the toy rabbit or the barometer, you should hurry. The lady will die in a matter of hours, probably less." And he stood to one side. It was a heavy bed, with 4 posts and a canopy. The bed curtains, of some dullish green material, were closely drawn on every side except the long side by which we saw Madame Thevenet in profile. Lean as a post, rigid, the strings of her cotton nightcap tightly tied under her chin, Madame Thevenet lay propped up there. But one eye rolled toward us, and it rolled horribly. Up to this time, the woman we call the Jezebel had said little. She chose this moment again to come brushing against my side. Her greenish eyes, lids half closed, shone in the light of Monsieur Duroc's candle. What she whispered was, "You don't really hate me, do you?" Maurice, I make a pause here. Since I wrote that sentence, I put down my pen and pressed my hands over my eyes, and once more I thought, but let me try again. I spent just 2 hours in the bedroom of Madame Thevenet, and at the end of the time, you shall hear why, I rushed out of that bedroom and out of number 23 Thomas Street like the maniac I was. The streets were full of people, of carriages, of omnibuses at early evening. Knowing no place of refuge save the saloon from which I had come, I gave its address to the cab driver. Since I had still swallowed no food, I may have been light-headed, yet I wished to pour out my heart to the friends who had bidden me return there. And where were they now? A new group, all new, lounged against the bar counter under brighter gaslight and brighter paint. Of all those who smote me on the back and cheered, none remained save the ancient giant who had implied friendship with General Washington. He, alas, lay helplessly drunk, with his head near a sawdust spitting box. Nevertheless, I was so moved that I took the liberty of thrusting a handful of banknotes into his pocket. He alone remained. Wait, there was another. I do not believe he had remained there because of me. Yet Monsieur Thaddeus Perley, still sitting alone at a little table by the pillar, with the open gas jet above, stared vacantly at the empty glass in his hand. He had named himself a foreigner. He was probably French. That was as well, for as I lurched against the table, I was befuddled, and all English had fled my wits. "Sir," said I, "will you permit a madman to share your table?" Monsieur Perley gave a great start, as though roused out of thought. He was now sober, this I saw. Indeed, his shiver and haggard face were due to lack of stimulant, rather than too much of it. "Sir," he stammered, getting to his feet, I shall be honored by your company." Automatically he opened his mouth to call for a waiter. His hand went to his pocket. He stopped. No, said I. "If you insist, Monsieur Perley, you may pay for the second bottle. The first is mine. I am sick at heart, and I would speak with a gentleman." At these last words, Monsieur Perley's whole expression changed. He sat down and gave me a grave, courtly nod. His eyes, which were his most expressive feature, studied my face and my disarray. "You are ill, Monsieur de Lafayette," he said. "Have you so soon come to grief in this civilized country?" "I have come to grief, yes, but not through civilization or the lack of it." I banged my fist on the table. "I have come to grief, Monsieur Perley, through miracles or magic. I have come to grief with a problem which no man's ingenuity can solve." Monsieur Perley looked at me in a strange way, but someone had brought a bottle of brandy with its accessories. Monsieur Perley's trembling hand slopped a generous allowance into my glass, and an even more generous one into his own. "This is very curious," he remarked, eyeing the glass. "A murder, was it?" "No, but a valuable document has disappeared. The most thorough search by the police cannot find it." Touch him anywhere, and he flinched. Monsieur Perley, for some extraordinary reason, appeared to think I was mocking him. "A document, you say? His laugh was a trifle unearthly. "Come now, what was it by any chance? A letter?" No, it was a will. 3 large sheets of parchment, of the size you call foolscap. Listen." And as Monsieur Perlis added water to his brandy and gulped down about 1/3 of it, I leaned across the table. Madame Thevenet, of whom you may have heard me speak in this café, was an invalid, but until the early hours of this morning she was not bedridden. She could move and walk about her room and so on. She had been lured away from Paris and her family by a green-eyed woman called the Jezebel. But a kindly lawyer of this city, Monsieur Duroc, believed that Madame suffered and had had a bad conscience about her own daughter. Last night, despite the Jezebel, he persuaded Madame at last to sign a will leaving all her money to this daughter. And the daughter, Claudine, is in mortal need of it. From my brother and myself, who have more than enough, she will not accept a sou. Her affianced, Lieutenant Delange, is as poor as she. But unless she leaves France for Switzerland, she will die. I will not conceal from you that Claudine suffers from that dread disease we politely call consumption. Monsieur Perlis stopped with his glass again halfway to his mouth. He believed me now. I sensed it. Yet under the dark hair tumbled on his forehead, his face had gone as white as his neat, mended shirt frill. "So very little thing is money," he whispered, "so very little a thing." And he lifted the glass and drained it. "Do you not think I am mocking you, sir?" No, says Monsieur Perlis, shading his eyes with one hand. "I knew myself of one such case. She is dead. Pray continue." "Last night, I repeat, Madame Thevenet changed her mind. When Monsieur Duroc paid his weekly evening visit, with the news that I should arrive today, Madame fairly chattered with eagerness and a kind of terror. Death was approaching, she said. She had a presentiment. As I spoke, Maurice, there returned to me the image of that shadowy, arsenic-green bedroom in the shuttered house, and what Monsieur Duroc had told me. Madame, I continued, cried out to Monsieur Duroc that he must bolt the bedroom door. She feared the Jezebel, who lurked but said nothing. Monsieur Duroc drew up to her bedside a portable writing desk with 2 good candles. For a long time Madame spoke, pouring out her contrition, her self-abasement, the story of an unhappy marriage, all of which Monsieur Duroc, sweating with embarrassment, was obliged to write down until it covered 3 large parchment sheets. But it was done, Monsieur Perlis. The will, in effect, left everything to her daughter Claudine. It revoked a previous will by which all had been left, and this can be done in French law, as we both know, to Jezebel of the muddy complexion and the muddy yellow hair. Well, then, Monsieur Duroc sallies into the street, where he finds 2 sober fellows who come in. Madame signs the will, Monsieur Duroc sands it, and the 2 men from the street affix their signatures as witnesses. Then they are gone. Monsieur Duroc folds the will lengthwise and prepares to put it into his carpet-bag. Now, Monsieur Perlis, mark what follows. No, cries Madame, with the shadow of her peaked nightcap wagging on the locked shutters beyond. I wish to keep it for this one night. For this one night, Madame? Asks Monsieur Duroc. I wish to press it against my heart, says Madame Thevenet. I wish to read it once, twice, 1,000 times. Monsieur Duroc, what time is it? Whereupon he takes out his gold repeater and opens it. To his astonishment, it is 1 o'clock in the morning. Yet he touches the spring of the repeater, and its pulse beat rings 1. Monsieur Duroc, pleads Madame Thevenet, remain here with me for the rest of the night, please. Madame, cries Monsieur Duroc, shocked to the very fans of his beard, that would not be correct. Yes, you are right, says Madame. And never, swears the lawyer, has he seen her less bleary of eye, more alive with wit and cunning, more the great lady of ruin, than there in that green and shadowy and foul-smelling room. Yet this very fact puts her in more and more terror of the Jezebel, who is never seen. She points to Monsieur Duroc's carpet-bag. I think you have much work to do, dear sir. Monsieur Duroc groaned. The good Lord knows I have. Outside the only door of this room, says Madame, there is a small dressing-room. Set up your writing desk beside the door there, so that no one may enter without your knowledge. Do your work there. You shall have a lamp and many candles. Do it, shrieks Madame, for the sake of Claudine and for the sake of an old friendship. Very naturally, Monsieur Duroc hesitated. "She will be hovering," pleads Madame Thevernet, pressing the will against her breast. "This I shall read and read and read and sanctify with my tears. If I find I am falling asleep," and here the old lady looked cunning, "I shall hide it. But no matter, even she cannot penetrate through locked shutters and a guarded door." Well, in fine, the lawyer at length yielded. He set up his writing desk against the very doorpost outside the door. When he last saw Madame, before closing the door, he saw her in profile with the green bed curtains drawn, except on that side, propped up with a tall candle burning on a table at her right hand. Ah, that night! I think I see Monsieur Duroc at his writing table, as he has told me, in an airless dressing room with no clock ticking. I see him at times removing his oval spectacles to press his smarting eyes. I see him returning to his legal papers, while his pen scratches through the wicked hours of the night. He heard nothing, or virtually nothing, until 5 o'clock in the morning. Then, which turned him cold and flabby, he heard a cry, which he describes as being like that of a deaf mute. The communicating door had not been bolted on Madame Thevernet's side, in case she needed help. Monsieur Duroc rushed into the other room. On the table, at Madame's right hand, the tall candle had burnt down to a flattish mass of wax, over which still hovered a faint bluish flame. Madame herself lay rigid on her peaked nightcap. That revival of spirit last night, or remorse in her bitter heart, had brought on the last paralysis. Though Monsieur Duroc tried to question her, she could move only her eyes. Then Monsieur Duroc noticed that the will, which she had clutched as a doomed religious might clutch a crucifix, was not in her hand or on the bed. "Where's the will?" he shouted at her, as though she were deaf too. "Where is the will?" Madame Thevernet's eyes fixed on him. Then they moved down and looked steadily at a trumpery toy, a rabbit, perhaps 4 inches high, made of pink velours or the like, which lay on the bed. Again she looked at Monsieur Duroc, as though to emphasize this. Then her eyes rolled, this time with dreadful effect, towards a large barometer, shaped like a warming pan, which hung on the wall beside the door. 3 times she did this before the bluish candle flame flickered and went out, and I, Amand de Lafayette, paused here in my recital to Monsieur Perlet. Again I became aware that I was seated in the garish saloon, swilling brandy amid loud talk that beat the air. There was a thumping noise from the theater above our heads and faint strains of music. "The will," I said, "was not stolen. Not even the Jezebel could have melted through locked shutters or a guarded door. The will was not hidden, because no inch of the room remains unsearched. Yet the will is gone." I threw a glance across the table at Monsieur Perlet. To me, I am sure, the brandy had given strength and steadied my nerves. With Monsieur Perlet, I was not so sure. He was a little flushed. That slightly wild look, which I had observed before, had crept up especially into one eye, giving his whole face a somewhat lopsided appearance. Yet all his self-confidence had returned. He gave me a little crooked smile. I struck the table. "Do you honor me with your attention, Monsieur Perlet?" "What song the sirens sang," he said to me, "or what name Achilles assumed when he hid himself among women, although puzzling questions are not beyond all conjecture." "They are beyond my conjecture," I cried, "and so is this." Monsieur Perlet extended his hand, spread his fingers, and examined them as one who owns the universe. "It is some little time," he remarked, "since I have concerned myself with these trifles." His eyes returned into a dream. "Yet I have given some trifling aid in the past to the prefect of the Parisian police." "You are a Frenchman." "I knew it." "And the police?" Seeing his lofty look, I added, "As an amateur. Understood?" "Understood." Then his delicate hand, it would be unjust to call it claw-like, shot across the table and fastened on my arm. The strange eyes burned toward my face. "A little more detail," he pleaded humbly. "A little more, I beg you. This woman, for instance, you call the Jezebel?" "It was she who met me at the house. And then?" I described for him my meeting with the Jezebel and Monsieur Duroc, and our entrance to the sick room, where the shaggy police officer sat in the armchair and the saturnine doctor faced us from beside the bed. "This woman," I exclaimed, with the room vividly before my eyes as I described it, "seems to have conceived for me, forgive me, a kind of passion. No doubt it was due to some idle compliments I once paid her at Paris. As I have explained, the Jezebel is not unattractive, even if she would only, again forgive me, wash her hair. None the less, when once more she brushed my side and whispered, 'You don't really hate me, do you?' I felt less than horror. It seemed to me that in some fashion I was responsible for the whole tragedy. While we stood beside the bed, Monsieur Duroc, the lawyer, poured out the story I have recounted. There lay the poor paralytic, and confirmed it with her eyes. The toy rabbit, a detestable pink color, lay in its same position on the bed. Behind me, hung against the wall by the door, was the large barometer. Apparently, for my benefit, Madame Thevenet again went through her dumb show with imploring eyes. She would look at the rabbit. Next, as Monsieur Duroc had not mentioned, she would roll her eyes all round her, for some desperate yet impenetrable reason, before fixing her gaze on the barometer. It meant what? The lawyer spoke then. "More light," gulped out Monsieur Duroc. "If you must have closed shutters and windows, then let us at least have more light." The Jezebel glided out to fetch candles. During Monsieur Duroc's explanation, he had several times mentioned my name. At first mention of it, the shaggy police officer jumped and put away his clasp knife. He beckoned to the physician, Dr. Harding, who went over for a whispered conference, whereupon the police officer sprang up. "Mr. Lafayette!" And he swung my hand pompously. "If I'd known it was you, Mr. Lafayette, I wouldn't have sat there like a bump on a log." "You are an officer of the police, sir," said I. "Can you think of no explanation?" He shook his head. "These people are Frenchies, Mr. Lafayette, and you're an American," he said with somewhat conspicuous lack of logic. "If they're telling the truth, let us assume that. I can't tell you where the old lady's will is," he stated positively, "but I can tell you where it ain't. It ain't hidden in this room." "But surely," I began in despair. At this moment the Jezebel, her brown taffeta dress rustling, glided back into the room with a handful of candles and a tin box of the new-style lucifer matches. She lighted several candles, sticking them on any surface in their own grease. There were one or two fine pieces of furniture, but the mottled marble tops were chipped and stained, the gilt sides cracked. There were a few mirrors, creating mimic spectral life. I saw a little more clearly the faded green paper of the walls, and what I perceived to be the partly open door of a cupboard. The floor was of bare boards. All this while I was conscious of two pairs of eyes, the imploring gaze of Madame Thevenet and the amorous gaze of Jezebel. One or the other I could have endured, but both together suffocated me. "Mr. Duroc here," said the shaggy police officer, clapping the distressed advocate on the shoulder, "sent a messenger in a cab at 5:30 this morning. And what time did we get here? I ask you and I tell you, 6 o'clock. Then he shook his finger at me in a kind of pride and fury of efficiency. "Why, Mr. Lafayette, there's been 14 men in this room from 6 this morning until just before you got here." "To search for Madame Thevenet's will, you mean?" The shaggy man nodded pretentiously and folded his arms. "Floor is solid," he stumped on the bare boards. "Walls and ceiling, nary an inch missed. We reckon we're smart, and we are." "But Madame Thevenet," I persisted, "was not a complete invalid until this morning. She could move about. If she became afraid of—" The name of the Jezebel choked me. "If she became afraid of, and did hide the will, where'd she hide it? Tell me." "In the furniture, then?" "Cabinet maker's in, Mr. Lafayette. No secret compartments." "In one of the mirrors?" "Took the backs off of 'em. No will hid there." "Up the chimney?" I cried. "Sent a chimney sweep up there," replied my companion in a ruminating way. Every time I guessed, he would leer at me in friendly and complacent challenge. "Yes, sirree, I reckon we're pretty smart, but we didn't find no will." The pink rabbit also seemed to leer from the bed. I saw Madame's eyes. Once again, as a desperate mind will fasten on trifles, I observed the strings of the nightcap beneath her scrawny chin. But I looked again at the toy rabbit. "Has it occurred to you," I said triumphantly, "to examine the bed and bedstead of Madame Thevenet?" My shaggy friend went to her bedside. "Poor old woman," he said. He spoke as though she were already a corpse. Then he turned round. We lifted her out just as gentle as a newborn babe, didn't we, ma'am? No hollow bedposts, nothing in the canopy, nothing in the frame or the feather beds or the curtains or the bedclothes." Suddenly the shaggy police officer became angry, as though he wished to be rid of the whole matter. "And it ain't in the toy rabbit," he said, "because you can see we slid it up, if you look close. And it ain't in that barometer there. It just ain't. It ain't here." There was a silence as heavy as the dusty, hot air of this room. "It is here," murmured Monsieur Duroc in his gruff voice. "It must be here." The Jezebel stood there meekly with downcast eyes, and I, in my turn, confessed that I lost my head. I stalked over to the barometer and tapped it. Its needle, which already indicated rain, cold, moved still further towards that point. I was not insane enough to hit it with my fist, but I crawled on the floor in search of the secret hiding place. I felt along the wall. The police officer, who kept repeating that nobody must touch anything, and he would take no responsibility until he went off duty at something o'clock, the police officer I ignored. What at length gave me pause was the cupboard, already thoroughly searched. In the cupboard hung a few withered dresses and gowns, as though they had shriveled with Madame Thevernet's body. But on the shelf of the cupboard, on the shelf stood a great number of perfume bottles. Even today, I fear, many of our countrymen think perfume a substitute for water and soap, and the state of Madame's hands would have confirmed this. But on the shelf were a few dusty novels. There was a crumpled and begrimed copy of yesterday's New York Sun. This newspaper did not contain a will, but it did contain a black beetle which ran across my hand. In a disgust past describing, I flung down the beetle and stomped on it. I closed the cupboard door, acknowledging defeat. Madame Thevernet's will had vanished, and at the same second, in that dim green room, still badly lighted, with only a few more candles, two voices cried out. One was my own voice. "In God's name, where is it?" The other was the deep voice of Monsieur Duroc. "Look at that woman! She knows!" And he meant the Jezebel. Monsieur Duroc, with his beard fans a-tremble, was pointing to the mirror, a little blurred, as these mirrors were. Our Jezebel had been looking into the mirror, with her back turned to us. Now she dodged, as at a stone thrown. With good poise, our Jezebel writhed this moment into a curtsy, turning to face us, but not before I also had seen that smile like a razor cut before the blood comes, as well as full knowledge, mocking knowledge, shining out of the wide-open eyes in the mirror. "You spoke to me, Monsieur Duroc?" She murmured the reply, also in French. "Listen to me," the lawyer said formally. "This will is not missing. It is in this room. You were not here last night. Something has made you guess the truth. You know where it is." "Are you unable to find it?" asked the Jezebel in surprise. "Stand back, young man," Monsieur Duroc said to me. "I ask you something, mademoiselle, in the name of justice." "Ask," said the Jezebel. "If Claudine Thevernet inherits the money to which she is entitled, you will be well paid, yes, overpaid. You know, Claudine, you know that." "I know it." "But if the will be not found," said Monsieur Duroc, again waving me back, "then you inherit everything, and Claudine will die. For it will be assumed—" "Yes," said the Jezebel, with one hand pressed against her breast. "You yourself, Monsieur Duroc, testify that all night a candle was burning at Madame's bedside. Well, the poor woman, whom I loved and cherished, repented of her ingratitude towards me. She burnt this new will at the candle flame. She crushed its ashes to powder and blew them away." "Is that true?" cried Monsieur Duroc. "They will assume it," smiled the Jezebel. "As you say." She looked at me. "And for you, Monsieur Armand." She glided closer. I can only say that I saw her eyes uncovered, or, if you wish to put it so, her soul and flesh together. "I would give you everything on earth," she said, "but I will not give you the doll face in Paris." "Listen to me," I said to her, so agitated that I seized her shoulders. "You are out of your senses. You cannot give Claudine to me. She will marry another man." "And do you think that matters to me?" asked the Jezebel, with her green eyes full on mine. "As long as you still love her?" There was a small crash as someone dropped a knife on the floor. We three, I think, had completely forgotten that we were not alone. There were two spectators, although they did not comprehend our speech. The saturnine Dr. Harding now occupied the green armchair, his long, thin legs in tight black trousers with strap under the boot instep were crossed and looked spidery. His high beaver hat glimmered on his head. The police officer, who was picking his teeth with a knife when I first saw him, had now dropped the knife when he tried to trim his nails. But both men sensed the atmosphere. Both were alert, feeling out with the tentacles of their nerves. The police officer shouted at me. "What's this gabble?" he said. "What's a gittin' into your head?" Grotesquely, it was the word head which gave me my inspiration. "The nightcap!" I exclaimed in English. "What nightcap?" For the nightcap of Madame Thevernet had a peak. It was large. It was tightly tied under the chin. It might well reveal a flat-pressed document which... But you understand. The police officer, dull-willed as he appeared, grasped the meaning in a flash. And how I wished I had never spoken, for the fellow meant well, but he was not gentle. As I raced around the curtained sides of the bed, the police officer was holding a candle in one hand and tearing off Madame's nightcap with the other. He found no will there, no document at all, only straggly wisps of hair on a skull grown ancient before its time. Madame Thevernet had been a great lady once. It must have been the last humiliation. 2 tears overflowed her eyes and ran down her cheeks. She lay propped up there in a nearly sitting position, but something seemed to wrench inside her, and she closed her eyes forever, and the Jezebel laughed. That is the end of my story. That is why I rushed out of the house like a madman. The will has vanished as though by magic. Or is it still there by magic? In any case, you find me at this table, grubby and disheveled and much ashamed. For a little time after I had finished my narrative to Monsieur Perlet in the saloon, it seemed to me that the bar counter was a trifle quieter, but a faint stamping continued from the theater above our heads. Then all was hushed, until a chorus rose to a tinkle of many banjos. "Oh, I come from Alabama with my banjo on my knee. I depart for Louisiana. Enough!" The song soon died away, and Monsieur Thaddeus Perlet did not even hear it. Monsieur Perlet sat looking downwards into an empty glass, so that I could not see his face. "Sir," he remarked almost bitterly, "you are a man of good heart. I am glad to be of service in a problem so trifling as this." "Trifling!" His voice was a little husky, but not slurred. His hand turned the glass round and round. "Will you permit me 2 questions?" asked Monsieur Perlet. 2 questions? 10,000 questions! More than 2 will be unnecessary. Still, Monsieur Perlet did not look up. This toy rabbit, of which so much was made, I would know its exact position on the bed. It was almost at the foot of the bed, and about the middle in a crossways direction. Ah, so I imagined. Were there 3 sheets of parchment forming the will, written upon 2 sides or upon 1? I had not told you, Monsieur Perlet, but Monsieur Duroc said upon 1 side only. Monsieur Perlet raised his head. His face was now flushed and distorted with drink, his eye grown wild. In his cups he was as proud as Satan, and as disdainful of others' intelligence. Yet he spoke with dignity and with careful clearness. "It is ironic, Monsieur de Lafayette, that I should tell you how to lay your hand on the missing will and the elusive money, since upon my word I have never been able to perform a like service for myself." And he smiled as at some secret joke. "Perhaps," he added, "it is the very simplicity of the thing which puts you at fault." I could only look at him in bewilderment. "Perhaps the mystery is a little too plain, a little too self-evident. You mock me, sir. I will not—" "Take me as I am," said Monsieur Perlet, whacking the foot of the glass on the table, "or leave me. Besides—" Here his wandering eye encountered a list of steam sailings pasted against the wall. "I leave tomorrow by the Parnassus for England, and then for France." "I meant no offense, Monsieur Perlet. If you have knowledge, speak." "Madame Thevernet," he said, carefully pouring himself more brandy, "hid the will in the middle of the night. Does it puzzle you that she took such precautions to hide the will? But the element of the autre must always betray itself. The Jezebel must not find that will. Yet Madame Thevernet trusted nobody, not even that worthy physician who attended her. If Madame were to die of a stroke, the police would be there and must soon, as she was sure, discover her simple device. Even if she were paralyzed, It would ensure the presence of other persons in the room to act as unwitting guards. Your cardinal error, Monsieur Perley, continued dispassionately, was one of ratiocination, rather of inaccurate ratiocination. You tell me that Madame Thevernet, to give you a hint, looked fixedly at some point near the foot of the bed. Why do you assume that she was looking at the toy rabbit? Because, I replied hotly, the toy rabbit was the only object she could have looked at. Pardon me, but it was not. You several times informed me that the bed curtains were closely drawn together on 3 sides. They were drawn on all but the long side towards the door. Therefore, the ideal reasoner, without having seen the room, may safely say that the curtains were drawn together at the foot of the bed? Yes, true. After looking fixedly at this point represented by the toy, Madame Thevernet then rolls her eyes all around her, in your phrase. May we assume that she wishes the curtains to be drawn back so that she may see something beyond the bed? It is possible, yes. It is more than possible, as I shall demonstrate. Let us direct our attention briefly to the incongruous phenomenon of the barometer on another wall. The barometer indicates rain, cold. Here Monsieur Perley's thin shoulders drew together under the old military cloak. Well, he said, the cold is on its way, yet this day for April has been warm outside and indoors oppressively hot? Yes, of course. You yourself, continued Monsieur Perley, inspecting his fingernails, told me what was directly opposite the foot of the bed. Let us suppose that the bed curtains are drawn open. Madame Thevernet, in her nearly seated position, is looking downwards. What would she have seen? The fireplace, I cried, the grate of the fireplace. Already we have a link with the weather. And what, as you have specified before, was in the grate of the fireplace? An unlighted coal fire. Exactly. And what is essential for the composition of such a fire? We need coal. We need kindling wood. But primarily and above all, we need paper, I cried. In the cupboard of that room, said Monsieur Perley, with his disdainful little smile, was a very crumpled and begrimed, mark that, not dusty copy of yesterday's New York Sun. To light fires, it's the most common and indeed the best use of our daily press. That copy had been used to build yesterday's fire, but something else, during the night, was substituted for it. You yourself remarked that extraordinarily dirty state of Madame Thevernet's hands. Monsieur Perley swallowed the brandy, and his flush deepened. Sir, he said loudly, you will find the will crumpled up with ends most obviously protruding under the coal and wood in the fireplace grate. Even had anyone taken the fire to pieces, we would have found only what appeared to be dirty blank paper, written side undermost, which could never be a valuable will. It was too self-evident to be seen. Now go. Go? I echoed stupidly. Monsieur Perley rose from his chair. Go, I say, he shouted, with an even wilder eye. The Jezebel could not light that fire. It was too warm, for one thing, and all day there were police officers with instructions that an outsider must not touch anything. But now Madame Thevernet kept warning you that the fire must not be lighted, or the will would be destroyed. Will you await me here? I called over my shoulder. Yes, yes, and perhaps there will be peace for that wretched girl with the lung trouble. Even as I ran out the door, I saw him, grotesque and pitiful, slumped across the table. Hope, rising and surging, seemed to sweep me along like the crack of a cabman's whip. But when I reached my destination, hope receded. The shaggy police officer was just descending the front steps. None of us coming back here, Mr. Lafayette, he called cheerily. Old Mrs. What's-her-name went and burnt that will at the candle last night. Here, what's o'clock? The front door was unlocked. I raced through that dark house and burst into the rear bedroom. The corpse still lay in the big, gloomy bed. Every candle had flickered almost down to its socket. The police officer's clasp knife, forgotten since he had dropped it, still lay on the bare boards, but the Jezebel was there. She knelt on the hearth with the tin box of lucifer matches she had brought there earlier. The match sputtered, a bluish fire. I saw her eagerness. She held the match to the grate. A lucifer, I said, in the hand of a Jezebel. And I struck her away from the grate so that she reeled against a chair and fell. Large coals, small coals rattled down in puffs of dust as I plunged my hands into the unlighted fire. Little sticks, sawed sticks, and I found it there, crumpled parchment sheets. But incontestably, Madame's will. "Monsieur Duroc," I called. "Monsieur Duroc!" "You and I, my brother Maurice, have fought the citizen king with bayonets, as we now fight the upstart Bonapartists. We need not be ashamed of tears. I confess, then, that tears overran my eyes and blinded me. I scarcely saw Monsieur Duroc as he hurried into the room. Certainly I did not see the Jezebel stealthily pick up the police officer's knife. I noticed nothing at all until she flew at me and stabbed me in the back. Peace, my brother. I have assured you all is well. At that time, faith, I was not much conscious of any hurt. I bade Monsieur Duroc, who was trembling, to wrench out the knife. I borrowed his roomy greatcoat to hide the blood. I must hurry back to that little table under the gas jet. I planned it all on my way back. Monsieur Perlis, apparently a stranger in this country, disliked it and was evidently very poor, even in France. But we are not precisely paupers. Even with his intense pride, he could not refuse, for such a service, a sum which would comfort him for the rest of his life. Back I plunged into the saloon and hurried down it. Then I stopped. The little round table by the pillar under the flaring gas jet was empty. How long I stood there I cannot tell. The back of my shirt, which at first had seemed full of blood, now stuck to the borrowed greatcoat. All of a sudden I caught sight of the fat-faced bartender with the gold teeth, who had been on service that afternoon and had returned now. As a mark of respect, he came out from behind the bar counter to greet me. "Where is the gentleman who is sitting at that table?" I pointed to it. My voice, in truth, must have sounded so hoarse and strange that he mistook it for anger. "Don't you worry about that, monsieur," said he reassuringly. "That's been tended to. We threw that drunken tramp out of here." "You threw?" "Right bang in the gutter. Had to crawl along in it before he could stand up." My bartender's face was pleased and vicious. "He ordered a bottle of our best brandy and couldn't pay for it." The face changed again. "God almighty, monsieur, what's wrong?" "I ordered that brandy." "He didn't say so. When the waiter brought me over, just looked me up and down, crazy-like, and said a gentleman would give him his IOU. Gentleman, puh!" "Monsieur Perlis," I said, restraining an impulse to kill that bartender, "is a friend of mine. He departs for France early tomorrow morning. Where is his hotel? Where can I find him?" "Perlis?" sneered my companion. "That ain't even its real name. I hearn tell. Gets high and mighty ideas from Upper Broadway, but his real name's on the IOU. A surge of hope once more almost blinded me. "Did you keep that IOU?" "Yes, I kep it," growled the bartender, fishing in his pocket. "God knows why, but I kep it." And at last, Maurice, I triumphed. True, I collapsed from my wound, and the fever would not let me remember that I must be at the dock when the Parnassus steam packet departed from New York next morning. I must remain here, shut up in a hotel room, and unable to sleep at night until I can take ship for home. But where I failed, you can succeed. He was to leave on the morrow by the Parnassus for England and then for France, so he told me. You can find him in 6 months at the most. In 6 months, I give you my word, he will be out of misery forever. IOU, reads the little slip, for 1 bottle of your best brandy, 45 cents. Signed, Edgar A. Poe. I remain, Maurice, your affectionate brother, Armand.
The Gentleman from Paris is copyrighted by the estate of John Dickson Carr. Music for this podcast, Claude Debussy's Sonata for Cello and Piano, was performed by Paul Bittman and Bang-Eun Lee. It was obtained from museopen.org. Mixing for the podcast was done by Jackie Sherbo. You can subscribe to Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine, where you'll find more stories like this one by visiting our website at elleryqueenmysterymagazine.com.